We return now. I mentioned in the introduction today, we have Lathan Watts joining us. He is the Director of Legal Communications for First Liberty Institute. We've had different people from First Liberty on the show many times, and I will let him tell you the details about First Liberty. But basically, they're a law firm here in Dallas, or I don't know if you're a law firm, you call yourselves a firm, law firm?
Law firm and think tank, yes.
Yeah, and think tank that defends religious liberty. They have the most amazing, interesting cases. And I thought on this day before July 4th, and this day we're going to celebrate tomorrow the Declaration of Independence and a country founded on religious liberty, it'd be a great time to catch up to see how we're really doing on religious liberty in America today. So first, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So glad you're here. There are been so many religious liberty cases, and I want to just kind of run through them, not just to have you tell our listeners what happened, but what's kind of the thinking behind them, and what is the reason that these cases are even coming to the forefront. The big one I wanted to start with involved the Bladensburg Cross, and I did, for our listeners, I did talk to you about this case. It was the enormous cross that ended up after some road reconstruction being in the middle of a public road, but it was constructed by or erected by women back after World War I, honoring their sons who were lost in the World War I. And and I'm not sure who was the plaintiff. This I'm sure you know who was the plaintiff.
The American Humanist Association.
Oh, the folks friendly to religion. So, Supreme Court came back on the Bladensburg case. Just tell me about that decision, what the court had to weigh and how they came down.
Certainly. So it was a big win, 7-2, and it is, pardon the pun, a monumental decision.
That's a good pun.
Because it really is sort of a whole new day in America when it comes to the court's Establishment Clause jurisprudence after this decision. This, as you said, the Bladensburg World War I memorial had stood for nearly 100 years until the American Humanist Association sent a couple of lawyers to drive by and get offended by it and file a lawsuit to tear it down because it is in the shape of a cross that now sits on land that's maintained by the state of Maryland. So we actually won that case at the district court level, and they appealed to the Fourth Circuit. At oral argument, one of the justices of the Fourth Circuit suggested we just cut the arms off the cross, and that would somehow
that was so practical.
Make it constitutional. So, not surprisingly, we appealed that decision to the Supreme Court. They took the case. We had oral argument back in February, and we just got the decision about 2 weeks ago. So, in a 7-2 decision, really a brilliant opinion written by Justice Alito to be able to get Justice Breyer and Kagan to come along with him, because I can tell you, after oral argument, sort of the conventional wisdom around our office was if the decision comes out and it's 7-2 or 6-3, it's likely going to be a narrow one that protects the memorial but doesn't really address the bigger problem in this area of jurisprudence, which is Lemon versus Kurtzman. And we thought, well, if it comes out and it's 5-4, then we probably got everything we wanted because they couldn't get the liberals to come along with them. So when we first heard it was 7-2, I was kind of like, oh, well, I mean, it's a win. And then I started reading the opinion. And it is just about everything that we asked for, including the fact that the majority opinion states that Lemon versus Kurtzman is no longer going to be applied in cases involving religious monuments, imagery, activities in the public square. And it's hard to overstate what a big win that is for religious liberty.
I want to jump in before
Sure.
Because people may not know this. To start with, the First Amendment, under which all the religious liberty cases are litigated, the First Amendment, the relevant portion says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the legal question in the court was, does having a cross stand on public land constitute an establishment of religion? And so what Lathan's referring to, and it's actually, I love that you're here to explain it. The Supreme Court had previously established a test, looking at a set of facts in a case. How do we decide if this set of facts constitutes a violation of the Establishment Clause in a case in which one of the parties happened to be named Lemon, so it's come to be called the Lemon Test. But the Lemon Test originally had a three-pronged thing about how you decide the Establishment Clause problem has occurred.
Right. So it was a very complicated, very fact-specific test that the court devised in that case, and the result of it really it caused more confusion than it ever clarified, and it created this scenario in which almost every time the test was applied, the subject matter in question ended up being ruled unconstitutional. If you failed any one of the three prongs of the test, then it was unconstitutional. And so it kind of developed into this test that nothing could pass. And courts were confused as how to apply it. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. So at oral argument, we argued, not only does the Bladensburg Memorial not violate the Establishment Clause, but it is time for Lemon to be put to death. I mean, once and for all. Justice Scalia had once referred to it as like a ghoul in a horror movie that just keeps coming back. And so that was the argument that we made, and the majority opinion says it's no longer going to be applied in cases involving monuments, memorials, activities in the public square are now presumably constitutional if they fit within the long-standing history and tradition of this country, which this memorial did and thousands of others do.
I want to jump in and just on this Lemon test thing, because I remember memorizing this in law school. But the Lemon test, how they used to decide if some monument or other thing violated the Establishment Clause is there a secular legislative purpose? Is there a secular reason for it? Is the primary or principal effect of in somehow not inhibiting religion, not advancing or inhibiting religion, so primary effect test. And then the excessive government entanglement test. Does something about this does it result in excessive government entanglement? And I'm glad you made that point. The way the decisions, the way the Lemon test was set, too many cases fell in the court's view as became violation of the Establishment Clause. And so it really kind of eviscerated the real meaning of the Establishment Clause, which, what was the original purpose of the Establishment Clause?
Certainly. I mean, the intent was there will be no national church of the United States of America. Point blank. That's it. I mean, they just fought a war with the greatest empire in the history of the world that had the Church of England that you were taxed to support. And they did not want that for this country. And so really, anything that's not coercing someone to worship in some way or compelling them to support some state-sponsored or approved church is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. And that third prong of the Lemon test that you talked about is excessive entanglement. Well, who decides what's excessive entanglement? And that's why it ended up where government is supposed to be neutral towards religion. This test ended up making it hostile towards religion. And to the point where just about every time it was applied, like I said, everything was ruled unconstitutional. So now we have a presumption of constitutionality, which completely shifts the focus and the analysis back to the original intent of the Constitution. And if in returning to that, our client in the case was the American Legion, who originally donated the property. The American Legion's already identified 3,000 memorials across the country that are safe now.
Wow.
Because of this decision.
It is a consequential decision. Yeah, that's great. Okay, there's a bunch of cases I was hoping to hit. The next one is a sweet cakes decision. Is there any final thing you want to say about Bladensburg? Sorry, did I wrap up here?
Yeah, one other thing about the decision. If you read the concurrence by Justice Gorsuch joined by Thomas, he also makes the point that with Lemon safely put on the shelf, you have also done away with the offended observer status.
Oh, is that ever excellent?
Yeah, because what that means, the reasonable observer standard, which was part of that excessive entanglement prong of the test, that if a reasonable observer thought that there was excessive entanglement, it was unconstitutional. But what that morphed into was the offended observer. As soon as someone was offended by something, they filed a lawsuit. And Gorsuch and Thomas say, if we're doing away with this, then these types of lawsuits should be dismissed for lack of standing, which means folks like the American Humanist Association, Freedom from Religion, who run around the country getting offended and filing lawsuits, are going to have a very tough time surviving motions to dismiss on these types of cases from now on.
Yeah, that was an excellent ruling. And that offended observer thing is just, you're setting anyone up, as you say, who has an hostile attitude toward religion to be offended and file a lawsuit. I love that it took away. Okay, I love that. Next one was a sweet cakes decision, and we talk about that in the show many times, but the people who own a bakery, is it in Portland? Where is it again?
In Oregon, yeah.
In Oregon?
Yeah, near Portland, I think, is the closest big city.
Yeah, and these are bakery owners who love to make custom wedding cakes, among other things. Anyone's welcome in their bakery all the time, but when they're asked to make a wedding cake, they customize it to the couple. They're very particular, get to know the couple, make it tailored to them. They are devout Christians, and they did not want to be putting their creative energies into building a cake, making a cake for a same-sex wedding, because that same-sex marriage was inconsistent with their religious views, with their Christian views. They had a long, long battle, which isn't worth reviewing, except to say they had a long, long battle, which they ultimately lost their business, and they were fined a large amount of money, told at one point by the Oregon, whatever the agency is called, they couldn't even talk in public about their views about marriage. And so they finally got in front of the Supreme Court. This is sweet cakes. What happened there?
So yes, we got that decision the same week we got the Bladensburg decision. So it was busy around our office, but it was a good busy. The Supreme Court did what's called grant, vacate, remand. So they heard basically the appeal on paper, vacated the Oregon Court of Appeals decision, sent it back to the Oregon Court of Appeals saying you need to do this again in light of the Masterpiece Cake Shop ruling from the previous term, which clearly says you cannot be hostile towards the religious beliefs of the citizens. And so now Aaron and Melissa Klein have a shot at a fair hearing in front of the Oregon Court of Appeals, which if they get it right, that will be over for Aaron and Melissa, and we would love that. If not, then we will go back to the Supreme Court and give them a chance to not only protect Aaron and Melissa, but part of our brief in that case was also to have them review Employment Division versus Smith, which is the other really, really bad precedent for religious liberty. It is to the Free Exercise Clause what Lemon was to the Establishment Clause. Mm-hmm. So hopefully Oregon Court of Appeals gets it right. If not, it may actually create an even bigger opportunity to remedy a really bad case on the Free Exercise Clause.
So again, I read to you the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, and the Free Exercise Clause, and the argument that people like the owners of Sweet Cakes would be saying is, I'm essentially being forced to exercise a religion or take an action that's inconsistent with my religion, and that violates my free exercise. So if I recall correctly, the Masterpiece Cake out of Denver area,
yes, Denver.
There was some disappointment because the Supreme Court didn't flat out say it's a violation of the Free Exercise Clause to force a citizen to do something inconsistent with their religious faith. Instead, they essentially said you can't pressure. I'm sorry, with the language of Masterpiece.
It's basically you can't be biased. They said the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado was openly hostile towards the man's religious beliefs, and so there was no way he got a fair hearing there. And they said the same thing about the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries, which has a Soviet ring to it to begin with.
Yes, it does.
But they said the same thing about them. That you were clearly hostile to these folks. You need to do this again and give them a fair hearing.
So, I remember talking at the time, actually on a different radio show I do about the Masterpiece case. So, as long as the state agency was more polite and more deferential and didn't say rude things about your religious beliefs, you maybe could survive that standard from the Supreme Court because they didn't exhibit hostility, right?
Correct. And the reason that Masterpiece and our case, Sweet Cakes, were brought as free speech claims, saying that this is actually government compelling this person to speak a message with which they sincerely disagree, is because the Free Exercise Clause and case law under free exercise has been roughly dormant after Employment Division versus Smith.
Which essentially holds?
Basically lowered the bar of scrutiny to say that if a law is neutral on its face towards religion, but it just happens to prohibit you from freely exercising your religion, well, it's okay. And so that's why these types of cases, you see them being brought as free speech cases, not as free exercise claims, because it is religious speech, and so we can bring it under First Amendment free speech grounds and have a better chance of winning, which is why if we get a chance to bring that back to the Supreme Court, we ask them to review Employment v. Smith.
It's a very good point. I love all this. I think the law is so interesting, and these cases are so interesting. And, in this, back to this being the day before July 4th, and the entire reason America was founded, or that the people left England and other places and came here, was to seek religious freedom. It's the primary, it's the first, why you call it first liberty. It's the first guarantee in the Bill of Rights, that we have the right to freedom of religion. So these are really important cases, and that's going to segue well into the next thing I want to talk about, which is the Chick-fil-A situation in Texas. Right. It's very interesting because we have the Supreme Court say that you have to, and that essentially legitimized same-sex marriage. And so you have people viewing that decision, saying, Obergefell saying you have a right to same-sex marriage, that your right to same-sex marriage should be equal with a religious freedom right. And so some people, and this is why it segues well into Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is a Christian family-owned business, and they They're open to anyone all the time. They serve anyone, but their owners have been outspoken about their traditional Christian faith and support of traditional marriage. So the city of San Antonio, in the great state of Texas, barred Chick-fil-A from being at the San Antonio airport, and that caused it because they were claiming that Chick-fil-A being opposed to the owners being opposed to same-sex marriage were essentially discriminating against same-sex couples, and Chick-fil-A owners saying, hey, we're just Christians and we're allowed to think what we think. And so it became a battle of butting heads of Obergefell same-sex marriage right from the Supreme Court, but what about and so Chick-fil-A ended up where we are right now. The state of Texas passed a law essentially trying to force, I don't know if actually a law passed or not, but where we are right now is that we have federal and state investigation into San Antonio about their refusal to let Chick-fil-A be at the airport because of their Christian views. So have you guys gotten involved in that at all?
We have. So when that first happened, we sent a letter to the Department of Transportation because the expansion and the upgrades at the San Antonio airport were due in part to a federal grant that they got from the Department of Transportation. And everybody who receives federal grant funds is required to comply with anti-discrimination sections of as a condition of getting the grant. And clearly, the city of San Antonio was discriminating against this company based on their religious beliefs. So we sent a letter to the Department of Transportation, just asked them to look into whether or not they were in compliance, and if not, they should have to give the grant money back. And not long after that, the FAA, which is under DOT, announced they were investigating both San Antonio and the city of Buffalo, New York, did the same thing. The city of San Antonio, when they approved the concessions contract for the new section of the airport, approved it on the express condition that Chick-fil-A would not be allowed to be a vendor there.
Wow. They actually had divulged that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a part of the vote. So, I mean, it was blatantly obvious. So we asked for the investigation, and now it's underway. We also, First Liberty also filed open records requests for emails, statements, basically anything discussing this decision to see if they had communicated in a way that indicated their bias against the religious beliefs of these folks. Of course, they were not too eager to give us any of that and did not want to comply with the open records request, so they appealed to the Texas Attorney General, who is also suing them for the same thing.
Okay.
So now, we're hoping that the Texas Attorney General's response is just make 2 copies of everything and send one to my office and one to First Liberty's office. So that is now ongoing, and we'll wait and see what we get from the city of San Antonio.
So you are an attorney, you're focusing on religious liberty, you're with First Liberty. Mm-hmm. What is the legal answer to the question, why, if the Supreme Court has acknowledged that same-sex marriage is permissible and must, not just permissible, but must be honored, why can there still be respect for the First Amendment free exercise right of Chick-fil-A and its owners and other people to not support or indulge or agree with same-sex marriage? I mean, how's that square out under the Constitution?
Well, I think the simplest way is that we don't punish thought in this country. And what our clients in Oregon were seeking to do, as we've said many times, they would serve all people, but they would not speak all messages. And the state of Oregon bankrupted them with a penalty of up to was $135,000, which basically bankrupted their business. And as you said, initially told them not to speak their beliefs on marriage.
Yep.
And that is viewpoint discrimination. That is the government saying there's only one acceptable view when it comes to the marriage issue. People have the right to disagree. Everybody, no matter what you believe about marriage, we can all agree that everybody has the right to live according to their beliefs. And so in the post-Obergefell era, I think you have 2 groups of people trying to figure out how to peacefully coexist. And on 2 ends of the spectrum is intolerance that really should not be in our country. One is we don't serve your kind here. Okay, that's Democrat, Jim Crow nonsense that's been illegal in this country for 50 years that nobody wants to go back to. Not our clients, none of the people involved in these kind of cases. On the other end, and just as wrong, is the government will decide that there is one viewpoint that is acceptable, and we will punish you for not speaking it. And that's what Aaron and Melissa Klein experienced. They felt like participating in this ceremony was speaking this message of that the government wanted them to speak. And if
to
you have,
condone same-sex marriage.
Exactly. And if you have a right to something, you inherently have the right not to do it also. So if you have the right to speak, you have the right not to speak. You have the right to freedom of assembly. You have the right not to participate in the assembly. And so that's what we're seeing is these two groups of people trying to figure out how to peacefully coexist. And the reasonable middle ground is what our clients were trying to do, which is to say, you know what, if you won't ask us to be a part of your wedding, we're not going to ask you who you're sleeping with if you come in to buy muffins in the morning, right?
We don't really care. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that should be a way that we can all get along.
You know, one analogy I made, because when the Sweet Cakes case came out and Masterpiece Bakery case was ongoing, it helped me get a clearer view of it. Because, so you can imagine the argument, if you own a bakery and you say, as you know, Lathan was just saying a moment ago, we long ago have said in this country, you don't permit businesses to say, we don't serve women, we don't serve people of a particular race or ethnicity. You can't do that. And so that argument seems like people could say, well, then therefore, why can't Sweet Cakes or Masterpiece Bakery, the Denver one, why can't they bake a cake that somebody wants? Aren't they essentially doing the same thing? But the reason that free speech and really freedom of religion are both part of that is because they are being asked to use their artistic skill, their artistic ability to design a cake to honor this particular couple. In the case of same-sex couples, they would be forced by the state to use their expression, their free speech, to honor something they don't want to answer. And as the short-term analogy I have said sometimes, it'd be like if I were told I had to make a speech saying why Hillary Clinton would have been the best president ever in America. You know, this would be, I don't believe that, I should never be forced to make that speech. In the same way with the Klein, the bakery and Sweet Cakes, and you shouldn't be forced by the government to say something you don't agree with, especially when the reason you don't agree with it is tied to your religious beliefs, your sincerely held religious beliefs. So, and I love your point. I want to finish one more thing on this, which is this coexistence issue. You know, you can have bakeries like Sweet Cakes and Masterpiece and other bakeries who happily will make a wedding cake for people who are pushing, throuple marriage or,
Sure.
or any marriage that you want. That you can have, there'll be bakeries available. But the insistence or the intolerance is really on the side of those saying, no, you must be forced to make a cake that honors my view of marriage, right. And you must therefore you're going to kind of be forced on you, right, to make a cake that violates your view of marriage. And I think there is this peaceful coexistence idea that you can have same-sex marriage legal under Obergefell, and you can have individuals with the right to not speak when they don't want to speak, to not be forced to give a message they don't believe in. That peaceful coexistence, I don't know what the constitutional premise would be behind it, but that's the right idea of honoring both sides' rights, I think.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's basically that your rights don't trump mine. Okay, we both have them, and we both have the right to live according to what we believe, and that's what the free exercise clause is really about. It is, there's a really dangerous interpretation of the free exercise clause that you hear from some people, that it's about your right to believe whatever you want to believe, or they call it the right to worship. Well, that confines religious belief, between the ears of the faithful or to the four walls of your church on Sunday. And the founders intended us to be able to live according to our beliefs every day of the week. And if you want to run a business according to your beliefs, because this is not the only type of cake that Aaron and Melissa would politely refer someone to another bakery for. I mean, if somebody came in and wanted a cake celebrating their divorce, they would refer them to somebody else. They're not going to speak that message. There are certain things around Halloween that they didn't want to be a part of, and they would refer people to another bakery, just like they did here. So if Aaron and Melissa ran the only bakery in Oregon, then you might have a case of, okay, yeah, they should be forced to do this. But all they did was refer them to another bakery who was happy to make the cake for them. It would be analogous to going to a kosher deli or a kosher bakery and asking for a pork
sandwich,
right, or a cake to celebrate Hitler's birthday. If some skinhead went into a Jewish baker's shop and asked him to make that, he's probably not going to make that cake, nor should he have to.
Right. I love that. There is something about the mutual, peaceful coexistence, mutual respect that needs to be inserted in the discussion. Last case on religious freedom, I'll quickly run by you, and
Sure.
I thought was so interesting, was that the Pennsylvania National Guard, which apparently is the overseer of some public property that is historic in nature.
Right.
The point of it is they give permission for various groups to come in and tour and walk through and see it. So Pennsylvania National Guard decided that a new organization, or new to me anyway, Trail Life USA, I think it's akin to Boy Scouts with a little bit more religious flavor to it.
Right. It's like a Christian scouting program.
Christian Scouting,
Yeah.
okay. So Pennsylvania National Guard told Trail Life they could not come and get this tour because that would constitute an establishment or religion, I guess, was their argument. So tell me what happened there.
Right. So the Trail Life USA wanted to bring their troop to tour this facility, and they went through all the proper requests and paperwork, and were initially told that they would be happy to give them the tour. And then upon finding that they were a religious organization, the tour was kind of sort of taken back and said, "No, actually, we're wrong. We can't do that because that would somehow appear that we are favoring religion over or non-religion, or one religion over another." And it gets back to what we've talked about before about a misunderstanding of what the First Amendment is all about. We worked with a Pennsylvania policy group up there and sent a letter up to the Guard and explained this is actually what the situation is what the law is. And thankfully, they remedied the situation very quickly, and the troops going to get their tour, and we're happy for them.
Well, I'm going to add, and I'm glad I didn't get the litigation, just took a letter, and
Yeah.
what I want to make the point on that is that the way the Pennsylvania National Guard handled that, it is a product of the cultural message being sent so frequently by the American humanists, by the separation from what's it
freedom
called?
from religion.
Freedom from
Yeah.
religion, yeah.
Yeah.
The people who are just stridently arguing that religion can have no place in public life, no
Right.
place at all. So the easier answer, if you're the Pennsylvania National Guard and you're worried maybe it's unconstitutional, you may be fearing either a lawsuit or at least public attention you don't like.
Right.
It's easier to decline to have any connection with religion, but it is a result, though, directly of this confrontational, aggressive attitude in litigation by these groups. So you kind of can't blame them because they're probably just trying to keep themselves free of litigation. But it really needs a pushback was vital. I'm so glad you did. First
And those
did.
groups count on that. They count on that sort of response. They'll send out thousands of letters a year threatening to sue you if you do this, that, or the other. When they really maybe
Like these groups
sue,
being
maybe like
humanists?
Freedom from Religion, American Humanist Association, Americans United for Separation of Church and State.
That's what I was gonna think of, yeah.
There's multiple ones. They count on that response. They'll send out
They
thousands.
count on bullying America.
Exactly, on sending out thousands of letters, knowing that they're really probably maybe going to sue 10 people in a year. But they hope that organization reacts just the way the National Guard started to until we were able to clarify it for them. And it gets back to the case we were originally discussing, the Bladensburg opinion. Justice Alito said, "A government that roams the land, tearing down monuments with religious symbolism and scrubbing away any reference to the divine, will strike many as aggressively hostile to religion." That's exactly what
You're
those
not
groups
kidding.
are doing.
Yes, it
they are
is.
roaming the land, looking for something to get offended by, and hoping they can get government to scrub it out of public view. And those days are over, thanks to this decision. That Lemon goes back to the early 70s, so I can, without exaggerating, say I live in a freer America than I have ever lived in my lifetime, because Lemon was older than I was.
Okay, you're a very young man. Okay. And on that note, will you just share with our listeners the website for First Liberty?
Certainly. It's firstliberty.org, or you can text the word liberty to 474747. You'll get a text back
Wow.
to get on our email list and get updated that way.
Okay, they have great emails, great informational emails, great website, lots of information, always available about liberty and freedom of religion in America. So, Lathan, thank you so much for
Thanks
coming
for
in
having me.
today.
Yeah, appreciate
Thank you. Okay.